Alright there geezers, Jules here from FGS, and before I begin today's list I just need to quickly find a coin to put into this slot machine that's on my microphone in order to stop it from releasing deadly poisonous gas so that I can record. What's that? That sounds like a feature that makes no sense whatsoever and is terrible. Well, boy howdy are you in for a treat, because we're actually going to be talking about video games that did the same thing, giving us interesting abilities, but at the expense of total and utter logic. Also, the mic was on sale, so what do you want me to do? I'll tell you what, let's have a chat. As I'm Jules, this is FGS, and these are 10 video game mechanics that make no sense. And as per usual, I'm not alone in this list, because I've also picked Asolanara's comment from last week's episode to appear here as a full-fat entry. And if you want to be part of next week's video, then have a think about what you pick as an upcoming open-world video game you just cannot wait to play. But for now, let's get on with things by starting off at number 10, the double jump. Now, as much as most of us love it, double jumping in video games is totally illogical. The double jump has of course been a staple of platformers for literally decades, enough that you might take for granted just how actually absurd it is. It's impossible to jump without having a surface to push your feet off of, and yet countless video game protagonists have managed to use thin air itself to propel themselves further into the sky. I mean, that's just not how physics in our world works. Yet the irony is that if platformers en masse suddenly stopped offering double jump as an option, it'd feel so wrong. We as players have all collectively agreed that double jumping is an awesome enough ability to trump its fundamental absurdity. Then again, when you're playing as an anthropomorphic jeans-wearing marsupial called Crash Bandicoot, who gives two figs about so-called realism? Number 9. Limitless Inventories. One of the most hilariously nonsensical things about many video games is the farcical manner with which a player's inventory is managed, or rather, not managed. Many games allow you to carry a quite frankly untenable amount of weapons. Take the likes of Doom and Grand Theft Auto, which typically let you keep a fully stocked portable armory on your person, despite this being completely impractical. I mean, where exactly is Tommy Vercetti and the Doomslayer keeping all that firepower? Said weapons basically exist in hammer space, an imaginary dimension cooked up to explain how cartoon, comic book, and video game characters can conjure up endless items out of thin air. But make no mistake, it's a ludicrous invention that we mostly agree on to accept, because the alternative of intense weapon limitations just isn't very cool. While more modern video games often saddle players with a decidedly not fun weapon limit, and Resident Evil forces you to play Tetris in order to organize your inventory, this is another sliver of outrageous game design that most are all too happy to overlook, or even embrace. Number 8. Rubber banding. One of the most maddening mechanics in video game history, rubber banding is deployed in racing games to prevent players from gaining an excessive lead on the AI competition. Because developers surmise that players probably want to play a competitive race rather than just routinely thrash their rivals, computer opponents will be improbably slingshotted closer to your position in the event that you race really well. This is perhaps most apparent in the Mario Kart franchise, which will reward skilled players by forcing the CPU racers to catch up to you. Conversely, it will often slow things down if you're struggling to reach first place. The problem is that rubber banding is so well known by gamers today that the illusion has just fizzled away entirely, ensuring that many are just simply irritated by the fact that they just can't leave the competition choking on their dust if they're actually good enough. And this is prevalent enough in the racing genre that it's honestly genuinely shocking when a racer doesn't include it. Number 7. Enemies that level up when you do. And so we come to Asolanara's entry, who posited a potentially painful memory that came about while playing Remnant from the Ashes. Now, it soon became clear that whenever they leveled up their guns, the enemy would also receive a boost in their stats and damage sponginess. So it begs the question, why bother level up weapons at all? It's a fair point for sure, and does raise a significant question of other games that do this as well. I mean, why do enemies get stronger with the player? How does a boost in my power stuff them full of steroids? And from a gameplay perspective, what a rubbish idea as well, as video games are meant to be kind of power fantasies, and so constantly keeping the player on a tether is a surefire way to kill the bloody mood. Thankfully, not all games take this approach and instead have fixed leveled enemies that scale in challenge depending on the area of the map you're in, with especially hard enemies being dubbed as beef gates by developers, which we all know I absolutely love. However, Remnant and its ilk really do make a mess of this, as not only does it not make sense, it's not that fun either. Number 6. Invisible walls. Invisible walls, one of the most blatant and unfortunately common immersion breakers in gaming. Because developers typically need to limit the player's ability to roam around, they'll often throw up an invisible wall which acts as a boundary and tells the player this is where the game world ends. Colliding with a force field like see-through wall is always incredibly jarring any time it happens, because of course it's totally at odds with the otherwise immersive world that the developers have been crafting. Some games have tried to mitigate this, like FPS titles such as Battlefield introducing a combat arena, where straying flying outside of the main bounds of the map will result in your speedy demise. But while limitations to the player's roaming ability need to exist, they should hopefully be less likely transparent than this, right? In the year of our Lord 2025, there has to be more creative ways to keep players fenced in, yeah? Number 5. Regenerating health. Regenerating health is a relatively polarizing mechanic in modern action games. Though back in the day, video games would largely offer up health packs and medic kits to restore players' health, the Call of Duty franchise popularized the notion of health that replenishes itself if you take cover and avoid further harm. From the perspective of creating a more casualized combat experience, it certainly makes sense, and for developers it's probably easier for balancing than figuring out how many health packs to chuck in throughout a map. But within the universe of the game itself, it's rather comical that simply lying low will allow you to recover from a gravely wounded near-death state. This ignores the serious medical attention that you need after sustaining numerous gunshot wounds, and to make things even funnier, some games will even straight up clean your bloody clothes as your health regenerates. I mean, in for a penny, in for a pound, right? If the alternative is getting stuck behind a checkpoint with low health and no medkits in sight, then regenerating health certainly has its place. Totally daft though it undeniably is. Number 4. Tall grass offers perfect cover. The stealth genre simply wouldn't work if most NPCs had the spatial awareness, common sense, and functioning eyeballs that actual people do. And so we collectively abide by a silly set of mechanics when sneaking our way to victory. And perhaps none is quite so laughable as the camouflaging properties of tall grass. Play just about any AAA game with a stealth component and you'll inevitably end up crawling through a thicket in order to avoid detection, no matter that even the most inattentive of guards should probably notice your head peeking out of the bush and inexplicably jostling around. It's the most basic Diet Coke iteration of stealth gameplay, but when developers feel the need to tick a box in order to keep their publisher happy without putting in the actual legwork to make it fun or interesting. This was all your fault, Assassin's Creed. Number 3. Game over if the party leader dies. So what's the worst mechanic that role-playing games have ever wrought upon players? Oh yeah, it's triggering a game over if the party leader dies. This is maddening because in the overwhelming majority of RPGs, players are able to revive their own fallen comrades with a restorative item like a Phoenix Down. You know, no muss, no fuss. Except this courtesy doesn't often extend to the party leader themselves, as upon being killed or KO'd, the rest of their party will apparently just shrug their shoulders and leave the poor guy's corpse to be picked apart by vultures. In reality, the rest of your party should be rifling through your pockets to administer a restorative item just as you did for them. There are precious few video games that can justify this nonsense on a narrative level, and so its persistence in the RPG space in particular remains absolutely infuriating, especially as it often forces you to baby the party leader during combat, which is no fun at all. Number 2. Infinitely respawning enemies. Yes, we're not quite done ragging on Call of Duty yet, because it deserves to be called out for its stubborn use of infinitely respawning enemies during combat. Now, the Call of Duty campaigns are typically designed to keep hurling never-ending fleets of enemies at the player until they're able to push forward past an arbitrary invisible line, which will then trigger a checkpoint. And in trickier engagements can prove both frustrating and tedious. Elsewhere, games might resurrect enemies every time you return to an area, or in the rage-inducing case of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, any time you decide to rest. This is one of those dated, old-school mechanics that desperately needs to remain in the past, making combat feel like repetitive busy work and encouraging you to sprint through it as fast as possible. Plus, from a logic point of view, even the biggest evil conglomerate doesn't have a literal infinite army of goons to toss at the player at a moment's notice, right? And number 1, non-lethal takedowns. And finally, we have a mechanic that absolutely makes sense as an idea, but is rarely executed in a way that works. We're talking about non-lethal takedowns, which offer players the chance to beast through a game without racking up a massive body count. Take the trank gun in the Metal Gear Solid franchise, which puts guards to sleep but has little regard for gravity. When somebody loses consciousness, they tend to fall down wherever they stand, and more often than not, their fragile head is going to make contact with the very hard ground. That is a recipe for a fractured skull or something much worse. Metal Gear Solid is by far the only offender though. It's even worse in the Batman Arkham games, where despite the Dark Knight's no-kill policy, he regularly incapacitates foes in a way that is primed to leave them with life-changing injuries, and that is being polite. Granted, it's tough to make non-lethal combat crunchy and satisfying while also ensuring the bad guys have a nice soft place to rest their heads when it's over, so it's another wild implausibility that many are just simply prepared to overlook. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 video game mechanics that make no sense. I hope that you enjoyed that, and let me know what you thought about it down in the comment section below. And also put down your suggestion for next week's episode, which is going to be on upcoming open world video games that you just cannot wait to play. Let me know which title you're most excited to get your hands on. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Blue Sky, where I'm at RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope you're treating yourself well, my friend. Hope you're having a great day, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.